looking into the topic of rising damp, it's probably one of the more controversial topics of building conservation. It is not complicated, but it's controversial. And we spent quite a bit of time researching this phenomenon, going back really to basics. And I have a presentation here. I will just show you a few slides. And here on the screen you can see a slide from one of the presentations I have done. And here just shows you, gives you a bit of the flavor, some of the research we have done during the past few years. We actually have taken the whole concept of rising damp back to the very, very basics, to taking one single brick, putting it in a tray, attaching some sensors to the inside of the brick, to the outside of the brick, putting some water and monitoring whether water will rise, to what height, and what's going to happen. So in a strictly controlled lab environment, which was well heated, well ventilated, non-condensing, so condensation wasn't an issue here. We wanted to see the basics, how water rises in the building fabric. Then we went one step further. We created a small wall. We added a bit of soil here, and then we monitored the rise of water through a more real type of scenario when we have a soil. Then we started building little walls, and then finally we went to real buildings and verifying the lab findings on real buildings. And we wanted to understand what the main stages of rising damps are, what additional phenomena accompany the movement of moisture, and whether what we see in the lab applies and is true in real buildings. And the answer was yes, it was. And if you want to understand rising damp, the fundamentals of rising damp, we need to go back to nature. And here what we see here is the water cycle, which is probably taught at primary school. We have the water makes an ongoing cycle in nature, rainwater falls and vapors rise. So we have two elements of these two main arms of the water circulation. Rainwater coming down in liquid form, collecting in the ground, then evaporating upwards as vapors. And what is interesting and what is important, that only vapors rise. So if we build a wall onto the soil, and bear it in mind that the soil is always damp to some extent and is always evaporates upwards, then the moisture evaporation is going to occur inside the walls. The source of the moisture is the ground, typically from under the buildings, and we are going to have moisture evaporation occurring upwards. Now what is important to understand, this is not capillary action. Because if we look at the wall fabric, or we look at a wall in a normal scenario, we have the wall here, and then we have the water table under the wall. And in a majority of cases, or in a typical case scenario, the liquid water table is under the wall by quite a bit. And the point is that the water table is not going to touch the bottom of the wall. There's no liquid water at the bottom of the wall. And yes, in certain times of the year, typically in the winter time or after heavy rain or in a floody period, the water table can rise to an extent to have liquid water at the bottom of the walls. For example, like we have Venice, where the building is sitting in liquid water, then yes, we obviously have rising damp and we have capillary action. But in the majority of the cases, the water table is down there and we don't have liquid water to cause capillary action. So the only thing which is going to rise inside the brickwork are vapors, which are in this zone, the orange zone. And then what will happen is the vapors rising, because we are talking about extremely small capillaries, which have micron or anyway very, very, very small sizes. Very, very small amounts of vapor will saturate it and is going to reach 100% relative humidity. And because we have an ongoing pressure, we have the rise, it just keeps, the vapors are keep pushing, it just keep rising and rising. We have this pressure situation from the ground. As a result, the water will liquefy and is going to start condensing, which is going to lead us to an ongoing, to a phenomenon, long-term phenomenon. If we analyze the capillaries, we have the dry capillaries here, vapors moving into the capillaries. We have one layer of water, then we have two, and so on, eventually leading to a film, a liquid film of water on stage 4, which can lead to non-saturated or saturated capillary flow. So the point is that from vapor movement we can get liquid water inside the walls, but in a majority of cases, apart from when we have a lot of rain and we have flood, the capillary action which occurs inside the walls is indirect, is occurring through a vapor phase. And if you revisit this sketch here, basically what will happen inside the wall, we have the liquid water table, then we have this vapor area which can eventually lead to liquid water or vapor and liquid mix. And this is rising damp. Just one final comment here. When we look at the capillaries and we notice this liquefaction process here, this doesn't occur because of the wall is too cold. It doesn't occur because of the cooling effect of the wall. We have done extensive testing, putting sensors deep inside the walls and putting sensors outside of the wall, this in the middle of the winter, which is basically the walls are a lot more liable to condensation. And then what we found is that inside the walls, the temperature of the wall fabric is about 2 to 3 degrees warmer than the temperature of the surface. This at first sight sounds a bit counterintuitive. You think about this, oh well, this is, the walls are damper inside the wall, so the wall should be cooler and it condenses because it cools down. But no, it's not, because the walls have a thermal mass and the coolest part of the wall is going to be the evaporative surface, because evaporation cools the surface. And we put the sensors inside the walls and we were surprised to see that pretty much consistently the core of the wall is always warmer than the surface, and the surface is the coolest part. So pretty much this phenomenon occurs because of pressure. We have the moisture keeps rising from the ground, just keeps evaporating into the breathable wall fabric, and as a result the void is going to be filled with vapors, and this will make the water condense, and this occurs because of pressure. So that's pretty much the mechanism of rising damp. But the primary mechanism is vapor movement. The source of the moisture is the ground, is coming from the damp ground. And this is a self-sufficient mechanism. This whole vapor rise and then liquefaction inside the wall fabric is self-sufficient. It has nothing to do with water ingress inside the walls or liquid or rainwater. This will occur even if the building is very, very well kept. It will occur if the building is very, very well pointed and the building is maintained. It's an age thing. It's a complex scenario. And once we reach this liquid film along the capillaries, as is shown here on stage 4, then salts start moving into the wall fabric. Liquid diluted minerals from the ground, they start moving, which crystallize on the surface. And the salt movement will kick in additional mechanisms and will accelerate the whole process. I will not go into the scientific details too much, but the point is that we have the water rise through vapors, and then we have the effect of salts, and there are several mechanisms at play leading indirectly to capillary action. That's why we can see rising damp on internal walls, which are completely sheltered from rain. There's no way of being any other water ingress there, and it occurs because the vapor rise, the salts rise, and they create the problem overall. This kind of summarizes the 3 types of main water sources in all buildings. One is the falling arm, the liquid water coming down, and can take many, many forms, but it's basically rainwater ingress, and it affects old and new buildings alike, and it's very, very copious, it's very abundant, it creates fast damages. The second moisture source is the rising damp or soil evaporation, the vapors from the ground rising into the wall fabric, creating the problem of rising damp over time. And that's a self-sufficient mechanism. And third, we have the condensation here. And condensation occurs when we have vapors turn into liquid water because of either cooling or too much moisture. I'm not going to go into condensation. I'm going to do a video about condensation, the two main reasons behind condensation. At the moment, probably it's not that important.